So,
I can do that.
so Jennifer she is so smart and so talented, and it is great that we get to work on this because we haven't gotten to, I mean, we see each other on Zoom stuff, but we haven't like worked with each other. So I'm really happy to do this with you. I sometimes read, I sometimes do a PowerPoint, but I mostly like to do Q&A. So I'm probably going to read, I'm going to talk. I may show a little bit of a PowerPoint with part of my story, and I may not, we'll see. But I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm going to read from my book. This is chapter 14, and the title of this chapter is Stuttersplaining. And I had a little talk with Susan before this, and I asked her if I could swear and if I could talk about sex. So just a heads up, I'm not going to talk graphically, but I'm going to state some sex acts. So just a heads up there. I don't know, there were 15 people in Bridges. I wanted to give you a heads up there. So I'm going to read from this. And Elaine said this is okay. So if anybody is offended, it's Elaine's fault. And Elaine is right here on me. I don't know where she is on you. So, okay, so here we go. Okay. I've noticed that many able-bodied people possess a miraculous superpower. Whenever they are in the presence of someone with a disability, they are suddenly endowed with the expert knowledge of said disability. Oh, you may have multiple sclerosis. I should have said MS. MS. Have you considered going gluten-free? I bet if you pray hard enough, the good Lord will heal your cerebral palsy. Can I pray for you? No, this is usually followed by disappointment when the person being prayed for doesn't come flying out of their wheelchair. People who stutter are no less immune to the quote-unquote help of others. Consider the following anecdote. And by the way, in addition to being a person who stutters, I'm also a person who has dyslexia. And you got a little bit of that right there when I said anecdote instead of anecdote. So lots of fun to read out loud when you have these things. Anyway, I was with my friend Michelle, having a casual and private conversation at Starbucks. Michelle uses a wheelchair. As for me, I was stuttering up a storm. So when the guy started glancing over at us, I figured there were two possibilities. Either we were so smoking hot that he couldn't keep his eyes off of us, or he had a secret cure for one of our conditions. Unfortunately, it turned out to be the latter. He approached us and began the awkward preamble to his spiel. I gritted my teeth and waited to see if it would be aimed at me or Michelle. I guess it was my lucky day because he started to dispense with free elocution lessons. His advice was the usual, just breathe and slow down and think about what you're going to say kind of thing. I thanked him for the free advice with an implied, now get the hell out of my face. He still lingered. Maybe he was waiting for me to bow down and kiss his feet in humble gratitude when we finally got rid of him. Michelle was in disbelief. In this chapter, I talk about stuttersplaining. And what I go on to say here is what we witnessed that day is a phenomenon I like to call stutter-splaining. Maybe you've heard of mansplaining, when a man explains women's issues to a woman. It might be intended to show compassion or allyship, but it usually comes off as kind of patronizing and a little belittling. Just like mansplaining, so stuttersplaining occurs when someone who has never experienced a particular issue decides to lecture about it to someone who lives with that issue every single day. Stuttersplaining is the type of assholism, and I in the book I talk about assholisms, which is my word for microaggressions. And microaggressions are something that we all are capable of, just like we're all capable of being assholes, but we can learn to be, I guess, smaller assholes or less of an asshole. So that is just a heads up about that term and why I use it in that way. So stuttersplaining is a type of assholism, but it is so prevalent and wide-ranging that I think we need a whole chapter just to explain it. So I talk about, I go on in this chapter and I talk about the different types of stuttersplaining. One is the TV told me. And so, a lot of times when I get advice, people will preface it with either two things. I was watching Dr. Oz, or if you live in Berkeley, California, or in Ann Arbor, you will get, I was listening to NPR. And with that, you will get advice because people hear one segment of NPR and suddenly they have a master's degree in the thing you have. So I have a section in there about the TV and all the advice that I get from that. Also, a section on hippies and Jesus freaks. I live and I'm sure Jennifer has experience too, being in the Bay Area. We may not have people who want to put their hands on us, although that does happen, but we also have people who like want to rub their crystals on us. And so there is that element as well. And we can always tell them where they can put their crystals. But I wanted to read from the section that is titled Magical Sex. A while back, I was promoting one of my upcoming gigs on a Sunday morning radio show. Things were going more or less according to plan until we started taking calls. What is it about AM radio that brings the weirdos out of the woodwork? Especially the call-in segments. It's like a garage sale for opinions. Most of the stuff is regular stuff, but every now and then you get something that you're like, what the fuck? That morning, we got a prime example of what the fuck when a listener called to tell us about her friend who found true love and now doesn't stutter anymore. I was polite on the air, but I couldn't stop laughing about it with my friend afterwards. The poor woman. She was a grown adult who still believed in Disney princess magic. Who knew I was going? Who knew I had been a passive, stuttering beauty for this whole time, waiting for my prince to come and break the spell? That caller and her true love theory did a great job of showing how misogyny hurts us all. Her fairy tale logic not only undermines the anatomy of women, but it insults my husband as well. Ethan and I have been married for a while now, and I still stutter. I guess he isn't my true love. Thanks for nothing, Ethan. my stuttering is your fault. And that window blind, he breaks the window blinds in the room over there, because he can't open the window and put the blind up, so he breaks the blinds. Anyway, that is an aside. He's at work right now, so we can talk about him. While it's easy to make fun of the caller and her delusions, she is far from alone. A surprising number of people believe that stuttering is caused by a lack of romantic and sexual fulfillment. Once, after a stand-up show, I had a male audience member offer me his own diagnosis. You stutter because you have the wrong kinds of orgasms. I guess he missed that part in my act where I humiliate guys who say pervy things. When I asked him what would constitute a right kind of orgasm, he simply replied, in the butt. Wow. But believe it or not, he had 3 women in his party and 0 qualms about creeping them out. Clearly embarrassed by their association with this guy and his comment, the women put him in his place. Did you even hear her jokes, they said? What's that? That's the kind of thing she is talking about. Now she's going to make fun of your dumbass on stage, which I did. With all that having been said, I simply added, and I don't think that helps stuttering at all. They couldn't be, it's the 2 people who had said this couldn't be further apart in their tone, but they share a commonality. Do you know what it is? Do you know what they share in common? I have a hint. It's Freud's favorite thing to talk about. Did you guess yet? No? Penis. It's the penis. Both of these stories revolve around people who believe in the same patriarchal penis cures everything bullshit. We can be saved by accepting penis into our lives, and not just for women. The myth can be modified for men who stutter too, in which they are miraculously cured by having their penises touched. Consider the 1975 Academy Award winning film, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. At one point in the movie, a stuttering character, Billy Bibbit, becomes temporarily fluent after losing his virginity to a woman named Candy. Of course, no actual professional would ever prescribe this, right? I was talking with my friend Virgil, a young man who stutters. Our conversation turned to the subject of relationships, which turned into me talking openly about sex because I am a liberated woman who survives Catholic school, and that's how I roll. I think my openness put Virgil at ease because he shared the fact that he was a virgin. He didn't have a strict religious upbringing or any sexual hangups. It just hadn't happened yet. He'd been on several dates and probably could have gotten it over with, but he didn't. And besides that, he was only 23. He had plenty of time. Then Virgil told me something else. My therapist says, once I start having sex, I'm going to stop stuttering. What? My eyeballs nearly popped out of my head. I fought back the urge to tell him what I thought about a so-called therapist and followed up with the neutral question, how do you feel about that? Virgil said he knew it was bullshit, but his therapist had helped him in so many other ways that he let this one slide. Good, I said, because, that's pretty messed up, right? I don't know where Virgil's therapist got the idea that virginity caused stuttering, but I would bet money that it was on the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. it wouldn't be the first time that a professional ignored scientific literature and based their opinion on a movie. My friend Pam once had a therapist tell her that stuttering is caused by emotional trauma because that's what they saw in the King's Speech. This is literally as stupid as a marine biologist basing all of their knowledge on Jaws. Actually, because the characters in the King's Speech were working with the 30 science, it's even worse because at least Jaws happened in the 1970s. Over the next couple of weeks, Virgil and I would joke about what the therapist says, but I was pissed. For most people, losing your virginity is an overload of expectations, anxieties, and emotions. What kind of sociopath would also add an imaginary cure for stuttering on top of that? I was angry to the point that I was ready to de-virginize Virgil myself, just to prove the therapist wrong. But then my rational side of my brain won out. Eventually, Virgil did meet a special someone. As they grew closer, I could see nature would take its course. Then one Sunday morning, I got a text, and the text read, "I still stutter." Because he did it. So I texted back, "Keep trying." And that is my chapter on stutter-splaining. And thank you for letting me share that with you. And so I wanted to share that as an opening because I know there are so many people who have disabilities who get these unwanted things all the time. And part of that is it's a rehabilitation model of we should be cured. Why aren't we like everybody else? And people don't understand that what many of us are trying to do is to lead our lives. And if I worked on my stutter all the time, I would talk like this and be very fluent. And that's not who I am. And that's where there's a lot of education that we need to do, and we being it's the world, just not us, because we do it constantly, of letting people know that bringing our most authentic selves into the world is what the goal is, whether we have a disability or not. And I think what I'm going to do, Jennifer, is explain a little bit about stuttering, and then maybe we could talk, and then I might reference the PowerPoint, and I might not, so we'll see. A lot of times stuttering is misunderstood. It impacts 1% of the adult population and 3 to 4% of the kid population. Recently, it's gotten a lot more attention because of Joe Biden. Joe Biden considers himself a person who has overcome stuttering, but as we have seen a lot of times, people think he can't find the right word. People think that he has dementia. When you watch him as a person who stutters, you can see that he might be substituting words. That, sometimes I see him talking about Obama, and he'll say my old boss instead. So he does those kinds of substitutions. I wrote a joke recently where I say that this is the first time in history that the 2 presidential candidates represent both sides of my disability identity. Trump is thought to have dyslexia, and that was written by his niece in her book. And of course, but Biden considers himself a person who is recovering from stuttering. And it just goes to show you that just because you have a disability, it doesn't have to stop you. You can even be president of the United States as long as you're not a woman. So there you go. That is my perspective on that. So, but I wanted to talk a little bit about him because I also am very interested to see in the debates how things are going to go, because and I'm going to be very kind here to Trump, calling him like it's our roast master. He is great at roasting people. And for Biden, I just know I'm going to cringe when, you know, if like Trump does a or, you know, any of those things I've seen throughout my life. So I will be clenching down hard when I am watching the debates. And I just would love to see Biden just kind of come out and say that he stutters and this is the thing. But I don't think he sees himself in that way. I think he sees himself as his hero's journey of overcoming stuttering. And as many of us know here, a disability identity is very individualized. You can't make someone go further down on that path than they are, and everybody has to come to it at their own time. I think he may come to it in the middle of a debate. I don't know. So what stuttering is, it is not caused by trauma, like the King's Speech said. It is most likely, according to the recent research, there is a difference in our brain right here on the left side. If you took a Psych 1 class or brain class or something, you will know that on the left side is the language side, and also right near there is Broca's area, and that is the expressive part of speech. So when you talk, that is using Broca's area. Now, people who stutter have a difference in the brain that is the coordination and the motor part of speaking. Speaking, because when we use the right side of our brain, then we don't stutter. And that's why you had people like Mel Tillis and Bill Withers who were fluent when they sang, but when they spoke, they stuttered. And Mel Tillis is one of my like my most favorite stutterer in history, because he was just so open about it and so funny and so great. Anyway, my other favorite person who stutters is Marilyn Monroe. And by the way, she, of course, is the actress who stutters. If you're going to stutter and you're going to change your name, why would you do a double M name? That makes no sense to me. But I am guessing she stutters on C's or something like that. So she actually made an adjustment in her speech, and that's why she talked like this, because if you talk like this, you can speak from the right side of your brain instead of the left side of your brain, and you're more fluent. Now, once I was talking to a guy and explaining that to him, and he said, the way you're talking is very sexy. Maybe you should talk like that all the time. And I was like, no, that's cool. I think that I'd rather stutter. So that is a little bit about what goes on with stuttering. Sometimes we stutter more, sometimes we stutter less. There's some situations like when I read, when I'm not in control of my words and I have to read things in a certain way, I am going to stutter more. And I find that the more deliberate that I have to be with my speech, then I stutter more because it's more on the left side. But that's just my own observation. Also, certain times of the month, as a woman, I stutter there more too. So with that, Jennifer, I'm going to bring it over to you, and then we'll see what to do next.
All right, cool. Well, I wanted to see, let me, am I unmuted? Yes, I am. Okay. I wanted to see if anybody had any questions out there. You can type them into the chat, or you can speak up. Ask away.
I just wanted to tell you that this is after the fact. There are a couple things in the chat, but the Bridges people said that everyone is an adult, so to go ahead. So I didn't interrupt you.
No, and I saw that, and I took liberties accordingly. So thank you, Bridges people, for being okay with that. Hope you cuffed your ears if there was anything that you didn't want to hear.
And Amy King said she was glad she was on mute because she absolutely hollered at one point when you were talking.
You know, if you want to unmute yourself to laugh, I would be okay with that. And thank you for the butt stuff, Amy. Appreciate that.
How accurate is the King's speech? Because that's
how accurate is it?
Yeah.
You mean historically or stuttering experience-wise?
I mean, it's stuttering experience-wise, because I think historically, I've seen a documentary on it. It appears to be quite accurate in terms of the story. A little bit license.
You know, and what I really appreciated about the film, and there is a few things. First of all, the King did not kill anybody or get killed or die by the end of the film. So right there, a positive, a positive stuttering character. Because up until rocket science, there was always a character in a movie. If they stuttered, it was a weird thing. It was like either in Do the Right Thing, there's this Tiresias kind of character who predicts, like they are the stutterer who also speaks the truth. So there's that kind of symbolism. You know, we are more than a symbol, and I appreciated the King's speech because of that. The movie was written by David Seidel. I think I'm saying his right name. It's his name, right? And he's actually somebody who used to stutter. And so he, I think, had a lot of insight along with being a fan of King George's. So I think it got a lot of things right, and I think it got what stuttering was at that time. And yes, in the movie, the speech, the therapist-like character talks about it being caused by trauma. That was actually good science back then, because they didn't think that like the devil was in the tongue or anything like that, which is like, that's also sometimes thought to be that. And also that, you know, that it can be caused by something, that it's just not that, because it's a psychoanalyst of the day thought that we were anal retentive. Okay, and what that means is that they, you know, people who are anal retentive, they're cheap, they like to hoard, and what they thought was that we were hoarding our words. That much like our poop, we were constipated, but it was our words, so we had verbal constipation. Then there was a whole other camp of psychoanalysts who were like, that's good, I like that. But then they added that we were anal sadistic, meaning that we not only held in our words, but we also like to torture the listener with our speech. So basically, we were throwing shit at the listener. I hope that is not your experience here. I know some nights at an open mic when I'm trying to do some new jokes, it's totally like that. But I hope that that is not how I'm perceived here. So in that sense, it didn't have that. It's those aspects. So for the times, I thought it was great. I think when that film came out, when I was at my job, people would come up to me and they're like, I just want you to know, I saw the King's Speech. like, you know, they should get a coffee mug that was like Ally of the Year. And there was one person who came up to me and said, can't you stop stuttering like the guy in the King's Speech? And I had to explain to them. And this is one of those things that when you stutter, you will observe this about the ending, but if you don't, it just totally goes past you. When he did his final speech, at the very end, Lionel tells him, you did a great job, but you stuttered a little bit on this. And to that, King George said, well, I had, and he didn't say it like this, but I'm going to say it like this. King George said, well, I had to show him who was talking. And it was basically like his royal way of saying he was keeping it real. That like, it's still me and I still stutter. I'm sure that did not happen in real life, but I loved that aspect. And people think he is cured at the end. He's not. He still stutters. He has learned some tools, and those tools worked out great for him. That is wonderful. If I, like sometimes what I can do is if I'm trying to get out a word, I can tap my pen and get the word out. But that also becomes a habit, and I don't want that to be a habit, because I could, when I'm on the phone sometimes, and I'll say, this is and then I do Nina, and I jump up, I can get that out, but I don't want to be hopping around trying to get out my words. That is not good communication. And so those things, like he was rocking and trying to do all that, like, he was going up against Hitler. I'm trying to order a pastrami sandwich. He was on the radio, so it's a whole other thing. And it was a different time, and I think for that time, that was really empowering.
I was just going to ask you one last question, let other people. You talked about the people trying to pretend to be experts, and I've had that. I think every disabled person's had that experience. I just wondered, which is the worst pretend expert, the one who's trying to cure your stuttering or your dyslexia? Which, or they're about the same? They're about the same in terms of
that's why I love doing a disability Q&A, because you guys get it at a level I never asked that. And I'm able to kind of go into caves that I don't go into in most book talks, and people have no idea about my dyslexia. I really experienced that in isolation. And so people don't offer me a lot of cures there because they don't understand it. And they may think that I'm lazy, or that I didn't read the email, or that maybe I'm not that smart and I can't find the word that I'm trying to say. So I don't get a lot of advice there. And that's also where it's been easier to do jokes on stuttering than it is on dyslexia, because it's the stuff on stuttering writes itself. Like, I
Yes.
just have to wait for someone to be an asshole. I have a new 10-minute bit. This is great. And on dyslexia, that isn't the case.
I get occasionally people correcting me, and they would correct what I've written because they think that's what's needed. But they understood what I was writing. So you kind of think, why are you correcting it? You don't need to correct it. If you don't understand it, then say, I didn't understand this. What were you getting at? Fair enough. But if you understand it, why would you need to then correct me? And they then also try and correct my, say, the grammar or something. And I get that when I've done presentations and things like that, and particularly if you do any PowerPoint presentations and you not only misspell something on the PowerPoint, but if you're reading out something and it may be a strange word or a word in a different language, of course, we might not say it very well. Of course, the English language is one of the worst languages ever because it's got a bunch of letters that we don't really need, lots of silent letters, bunch of silly rules that frankly we could do with, thrown away, and the language would be far, far clearer and easier to understand and pronounce and also write. So I do get people doing the correction thing, and they think they're being nice to me. And all it does is come over rather patronizing and rude. And then they start talking down to me as though, I'm very senile and I don't really understand much. And I might be doing a presentation on something very complex and very intellectual, but because I got one word wrong, they think they're somehow clever. They really want to point out this one word. I've got one out of maybe, I don't know, several thousand words and quite a long talk and that. So I do get that. I still get this occasionally.
No, and I really appreciate you saying that because I get that a lot. And there's one that really pissed me off because I was talking to a group of teenagers who have dyslexia and ADHD and autism. And so I went to their class and I talked and there was like 50 of them. The kids were very engaged and I was talking to them about college, and I was saying how I have my doctorate, and part of how I did that was that I was able to advocate and find my strengths and go into a field that worked for me. And I wrote something on the board, and apparently I spelled it wrong. And I know I spelled it wrong because after the whole presentation, after the students left, one of the teachers in the class was like, oh, I just she came up to me, she's like, oh, I want to tell you something. I was like, oh, she's going to tell me how all these kids are going to want to go to college now and how I inspired them to want to do something with their life. I had all this fantasy there that I did so great and that I killed because I think I killed with the kids. She went on to say, this thing on the board, you spelled that wrong. And I was like, what I told her was spelling on the board doesn't count because my editor hasn't seen it, and to reinforce the need of an accommodation. But that's the kind of thing that just, it feels like, it kind of felt like, don't get too big because, I'm sure culturally it's done in different ways. It's a British are a little more subtle on things than the Americans, but it sounds like it's kind of an international issue.
Well, whenever I meet someone like that, they make a real effort to point out something really tiny, one tiny little thing, that it's wrong, and they want to really want to tell you that they've spotted this tiny little thing, and they completely ignore the wonderful things you've done, all the work you put in, and you might be showing some artwork, you might be doing some music, and you might be helping. I've talked to a lot of students and taught students, and so And when you do that, students quite often ignore it. They're not that bothered by it because they understand it. And if they understand it, then that's fine. The only time I would get a question is, what does that term mean? Or something like that. And then I explain it. But if you have an obfuscation, we have an organization called Ofsted. So any kind of teaching you do, you have to have an official obfuscation done, and they have a set of form. And they're always writing, oh, great resources, great rapport with the students, really engaging, really, you know, lesson was going at a nice pace and everything. A couple of criticism, you misspelt something, or your handout wasn't quite right. And they really want to, and they feel that they are doing their managerial job by pointing that out, and you know completely ignore the rest of it. Yeah.
And you know, in higher education, like I went to public high school. I was in Catholic school 1st through 8th. And then I went to public high school, and there I was saved. Catholic school did a number on my self-esteem. And what I always say is that you should never pity me for having a disability, but you can pity me for having a disability in a Catholic school in the 1980s, because that sucked. That was awful. But then I went to high school, and I was in special ed there. I was in the resource room. And so I would be pulled out for the resource services because of my dyslexia. Then I went on to community college, and I started to gain more and more confidence and more skills. Then I went to UC Berkeley. Then I went in for my doctorate. And I have to say, what I always tell people is the thing that got me ready for the assholes in the stand-up comedy world is the assholes in academia. Because as a person with a disability, and like they just find ways to like really pick at you, and like it's I hate that environment, and I hate what that represents, and how we are not fostering the many abilities, especially in dyslexia. And that's where I would love, like, I am a scholar of disability studies, but the way that I talk about my ideas, I got to use the F word. I don't want to write it down unless it's in a book that is highly edited. I don't want to be based on my journal articles. I don't want to, you know, I want to speak in a voice that is authentic to me. And that's why I chose comedy, is because I tried to do it, but the dyslexia and a lot of stuff in academia is so inaccessible for someone like me, both culturally and like physically.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's a bit like the Lord of the Flies in a way, because they're just trying to pick you off one by one, and trying to get rid of you, because they don't want anyone who is disabled about, because they don't want to deal with disability. And they certainly don't want someone who's any good at working with students. You tend to find disabled people make very good teachers, and actually have far better empathy and into student relationships, because, you know, we're already dealing with issues that many of the students are, and so we automatically understand things.
We learn in a different way, and you kind of teach the way that you learn. And we learn in multiple ways, and we bring that into the classroom. So I think there should be more of us out there. So.
Thank you so much, Ernest, for those for your thoughts. And to add to that, and then I'm going to get to another question. But I think this is sort of in line with what you guys are talking about. Is Judy White says, Rob Lee and some other people who are compassionate make me wonder if dyslexia has an impact on being compassionate. Fear of appearing senile is one I felt when I can't catch a word, but I am a bit more compassionate with others my age who can't find words, perhaps. She goes on to say, some people point at themselves and acknowledge the oddities, which makes many audience members sympathetic, and also it explains that maybe gives honor to spell check.
Yeah. Did you want to ask a follow-up there, Jennifer?
No, that was just
Okay.
Judy White's in the chat. Those were her comments based on what you guys were talking about. And then I have another
raising her hand too, so I bet she wants to expand on that. Judy?
That I was raising my hand. Yes, I think I would like to expand a little bit. Part of one thing that came up after I wrote those was I am often the one who says, well, you know, you missed us proofing, because I figure people want to make their proofing right. And so I never thought about it particularly that I was just being nitpicking. I thought I was being helpful. So maybe there's some other people like that too.
I just wanted to say that I could relate to this because my comprehension skills are a lot better. On the ACT, I scored, on my ACT test, I scored higher than my peers, but they wanted to put me in special ed because I couldn't spell right. Now, I think nowadays it would be like against the law. And guess how many times a week we did spelling?
How much every day?
We did once a week. And then I was just sitting doing my homework while everybody else was still doing their one-page assignment. And it was just like, oh my gosh. So I don't have a speech like stutter, but it's like people just want to focus on that one little thing, like Ernest said, and it was just like, oh my God. But luckily for today's youth, I don't think they could get away with that crap.
I certainly hope not, but I don't put it past any school district, especially for families that may not be as savvy with the laws, or, I mean, African American boys and Latino boys are still struggling with being put into special ed as a place of segregation. For me, I had the greatest special ed teacher ever, Miss Bramlett. She's still on my Facebook. She's one of my favorite people. And she saved my life, but not everybody has a Miss Bramlett, and so I think we still need to have a lot of checks and balances with that. But Judy, I think you wanted to say a little more.
Oh, I'm sorry if I cut you off.
Oh no, that's okay. Judy, you're on mute, I think. Yeah.
Oh, can someone put me on mute, please?
Oh, sure, I can put you on mute, and then I'll put her on, and then she'll unmute herself, and the right and wrong people, or the right people, will be muted and unmuted.
There she goes.
Okay.
I just think I finished the point, but I'm not sure if it was heard when just before Jess came in. I finished what I was actually trying to say.
No, and I really appreciate that point. I think for me, I know that my grammar and my spelling isn't that great. That's why one of my best friends, Mean Dave, who has appeared on these, he is in recovery, and he is a stand-up comic, and his only job is as a stand-up comic. So I pay him to read stuff for work. I pay him to read some of my book and put it through like the first draft. He has helped me with some articles that I've published. And then I have another friend who does even more in-depth work. And that's why it's really great to have artist friends, who are available to do this kind of work because they may need the extra funds. And so they are some of my go-tos.
And yeah, and I would add, I mean, Mean Dave is an excellent editor. I'm really impressed with, I mean, he should, I just want to, you know, throw that out there. He's really good at what he does. And I did not want to miss, there was another question that I didn't want to skip over. It's from Susan Fitzmaurice, and this is getting back to this is getting back to stuttering. She wants to know, do you know when you are going to stutter, or are you sometimes surprised by it?
Both. Yes to both. So in the morning when I wake up, and let's say, like right now, I am a counselor at a community college, which is why I get so like up in arms around higher education. When I make the first call, because now it's all either on Zoom or on the phone, and I say, hi, can I get your student ID? I'm like, oh, that's the kind of day that I'm going to have right there. That explains what my speech pattern is going to be. So it changes every day. And there's some situations that I stutter more, and I'm finding that when I'm on a phone that is an internet line, so it's a Google line, and there is a delay there. And so that delay is too much for my brain to process, and I stutter more in those kinds of situations. If there's a lot of background noise, either for me or for the other person, I tend to stutter more. There are certain sounds that you stutter on too. So some people may be more of a C or a K, and others may be N, B, and one of those other ones. There was once a psychoanalytic. I'm really big on the psychoanalytic view of stuttering because it's so weird and it's so outrageous. And there was an article written, I think in 2004, and the psychoanalyst did a case study. So, you know, that can be generalized to everybody in the population. And it was on a young man who stuttered, and he stuttered on the words baby and bottle and mother and Margaret. And she and the psychoanalyst thought this was very interesting because he must have some kind of mother complex. There are also all sounds that start with and boo, because if you are doing those sounds, they are by labial sounds, so your lips. And so you're going to stutter more on those. And so I kind of know the ones that I'm going to stutter on. And there's also sometimes a sequence of words that I will stutter on. So I have a joke in my act, which is I don't fake my stuttering, and I don't fake my orgasms, no matter how long either of those two things take. And they can both take hella fucking long. That those three words I will always stutter on. And I just know that and people think that I'm faking that. I just let that go, be in a natural stutter. So it's really weird how language is and what happens.
Just following on from that, does the weather affect you? Your stuttering? You know, when it's, say, early in the morning, it's very cold, that kind of thing, because it does affect some people in different conditions.
You know, I live in the Bay Area. I don't know what weather is. So, and I'm sorry to the people in Detroit, in Chicago. You guys have actual weather. Here it's always 60 to 80 degrees, or it's really hot. I don't find that it does. It might impact some. What one of my friends once explained, and I don't know what the research on this is. He has his PhD in speech and language, so this made a lot of sense to me. And he's also a person who stutters. He said that when you are using your resources, it's your cognitive resources, and they are being impacted a lot, then you'll stutter more. And so when we had horrible air here the past couple weeks, I don't remember if I stuttered less or more, but I can imagine, because my head is taken up by these other things, that I might stutter more, because it like weighs more on the cognition and functioning of your brain. That is one way to think about it. I'm sure there's someone who would counter that, so I'm not sure.
Well, over in the UK, of course, we have seasons. So with each season, it does change, and it can actually affect your how you speak. And so, you know, obviously in the spring, summer, people tend to be have less issues for some reason, because maybe their body is more regulated temperature-wise. But come as it gets colder, and particularly if they're getting up very early in the morning, and they're getting harsh winds against the face, of course, the face goes quite red, and you know, they get breathless and that. And so if they're getting hot and breathless, and if you're commuting into like London, you're going into the train, you're going down to the tube, and then you get into work and that kind of thing, you're rushing around, you're getting very hot, then you will have problems as you get into work, and that someone gives you a note or something, and you may completely misread the note and say, I quite often hand it back and say, can you just tell me what it is?
Yeah.
Can you read it out? You know, because there's no way I'm going to read that. I need to settle down before I can look at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it does. Yeah.
You know, and I think for me that's probably more true with the dyslexia than with the stutter. And George Carlin, this is an aside. I'm a really big comedy fan, and that's why I found comedy. Like, I have loved comedy longer than I've stuttered, and that's outlined in the book. But George Carlin has a bit where he says the first 15 minutes when you're at your job, that's your time. That is your time. They should not expect you to work. And that's when you look at the painting on the wall, and you're like, you know what? There's a duck in that painting. I've never seen that duck, but I know there's a duck now. And so, you know, I think that we sometimes need to ease into things. And I know now, like, I mean, I eased into this. I don't ease into everything. It's like, okay, I'm going to put on some lipstick and I'm going to go on Zoom. Like, that is not how I process information best to be prepared. This I was, but other stuff I'm not.
I have a question from Judy White. She wants to know if there is a difference between stuttering and stammering, and is dyslexia connected to stuttering, or is that, and she wants to know if there's like a connection to that and losing a word that you want to use. I'm sorry, I'm reading it. Let me
do it.
that. Yeah, or to the quality of. Oh, do you want to take that, Judy?
Yeah, I have trouble listening and typing and getting all those words in that little bitty space.
Me too.
But all my life, I guess I've had some trouble with stammering. I was afraid of being stuttering, but it didn't happen that way. But I always have had some trouble with stammering. But the more, and actually it's almost like I've got so many words that I can't get them all out quite in the right order, and I tend to stammer, particularly when it's a complicated thought. And I had cancer a couple years ago, and it had a real bad case of chemo brain. And afterwards, I had to do speech therapy, and it helped a lot for being able to remember words and articulate. But that quality of losing a word, like you're busy, your voice, you're talking, you know exactly what you want to say, only the word that is actually accurate, it's just gone. It's nowhere near. So you have to come up with something else. And I find that all my friends do the same thing. And this didn't used to be the case with my friends, but my friends, of course, have gotten older as I have. And so it seems like there might be some connection between stuttering, stammering, and losing your words. And I just want to know if you know if there is.
Okay, so stuttering and stammering from a speech and language and stuttering perspective are the same thing. If you are in the UK or India, it is stammering. If you're in Ireland, it is stammering. If you're in the US, in Canada, it's just stuttering. So that is in general. Now, what you're talking about is like the American version of stammering, which is like, it's more like a language processing thing, I think. Like, I know that I was going to say processing, but it came out processing. That's a stutter. Now, someone like Bob Newhart, like, people say that he stutters. Nah, he's a stammerer. And it's more that is his way that he talks. But going to the word finding thing, that is called dysnomia, a difficulty finding words. And that is something that I have as someone who has a language processing LD or a learning disability. So for me, I kind of separate it into two things. When I do my comedy, when I do a new thing, there is fluidity and there is fluency. Fluidity is fluidity of my language. Am I getting the joke right? Am I doing it in the order that I wanted to do it in? Am I saying it? Because in comedy, like, that's why I love this. Like, the pressure is off to be funny. When you do comedy, everything needs to be stripped down in the fat cut, and you have to get to the joke. You have to get to the punchline. And when you stutter, you have to do that even more so. I don't go on and on when I do comedy. And part of that in the in the open mic stage of my jokes, I go for fluidity. I'm trying to get the joke down. And then on top of that, I have fluency, where the first time I get on a stage with a new joke, I'm like, oh, in this I wrote in mediocre minestrone. I'm going to stutter a lot on that phrase in the middle of this joke. I should probably comment on that. And so there is that piece of it. Now, what I have been told, and this is both on dyslexia and with stuttering, that when women go through menopause, that those things are going to blow up a bit, because all women, as they age and go through that process, may have word finding difficulties. And this is also where I haven't talked about this stuttering community, but they are the ones who have really had an influence on me, and they are why I do stand-up comedy, is because I have been in that, I've been in the stuttering world, and that has empowered me to question what it's the internalized ableism and stigma that I have. So it's been very helpful in my life. And one of those things that I learned from having mentors in this stuttering community is the older women, older than me, what they have told me is that your stuttering goes up when you go through menopause, but by the time you get to that age, you don't give a fuck anyway. So that has been the thing. I was like, oh, that's so great to hear.
And I have a question, if we can back up a little bit.
Sure.
I'm still confused about the difference between stammering and I understand that it's different in different cities and countries, but like for the US folks, how is that? I'm still confused how stammering and stuttering, what's the difference?
So stuttering is what we call it here. The way that I speak right now is stuttering. For people who might, like, I'm trying to think of someone more recent than Bob Newhart who does more on stammering. Like sometimes Obama would put some stammering into his speeches, and then people like, oh, he's not smart, he's stuttering. It's actually a technique that people use that, like, and it's done among people in the ministry, where like the thing that you're gonna say is so important that you're gonna do like a and say it. And so it's actually, it's so interesting to me that that is used as a speech technique, where like it's something that I would be like, oh no, I'm doing this thing, but it's actually a good thing. So it's all how it's framed and who's doing it, all of that stuff. So stammering, I mean, I don't know what the definition is in the US, because I think it's kind of an amorphous thing. What I've also seen is, and hopefully our friend Ernest in the UK will appreciate this. I have someone in my life, my mom's friend, who is, she's a bit of like a pseudo-intellectual. She's kind of a snob. And she's like, oh, that person stammers because they have a UK accent, because they have like a fancy white accent. And so they are a stammerer. No, they stutter. It's just with a fancy accent. And so you think that it's better than stuttering with an American accent. And so there's also some judgments, I think, when it's used too.
Yeah, my grandma, she stammers, because I know the difference now, because she'll like say, or she'll be like, I understand, like over, like, and she doesn't even realize she's doing it. She'll go, like, just like, like.
Okay, so let me say one thing, and I don't know anything about your grandma, but I know that some people who stutter have secondary characteristics. And secondary characteristics are the things that we do because we think it's going to help us not stutter. So just like I was doing the thing with the pen.
Yeah.
She, or me personally, sometimes I will put a word in front of another word because I think that I'm going to stutter on that word. And so sometimes that's a and like when I was in 8th grade, I learned that if I said and before a word, that I would stutter less. So,
okay.
So when I called my friends and they weren't there and their moms asked who this was, I would say, this is and Nina. And they thought my name was Ann Nina because I would use that and right in front of my name, and it was so that I would stutter less instead of just saying, "Oh yeah, I stutter, and you're gonna get it right now, Nina." Then I would try to do a trick, and sometimes I've seen people do things like, you know what I'm saying, where they will talk and they'll say you know what I'm saying, as a way to put in a speech filler to be
Oh,
more
so like
fluent.
compensate?
Yes, yes. So it's just like a workaround. And to me, it's not an efficient one, because if someone just stutters, it would be better communication than having a filler word or trying to march it out or any of those things that we tend to make as a habit. And speech and language pathologists, what they do is they try to address those, because it's hard to get to the stutter if you're marching and trying to say your name.
Okay, thank you. And I think
I have dyslexia, and it's under control most of the time. But I know whenever I'm under stress or I'm sick, it comes out like crazy. It's like I can't spell anything. And
Yes.
it's even things that seem, like absolutely ordinary words I can't spell. So does that happen with stuttering too? That if things are going awry in your life, the stuttering is also?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Like when I was in my 20s, my mom would say, "Oh, you are stuttering a lot. What's wrong?" And I don't know. I don't think anything. So it's weird that it just goes up and down, and I don't know. I mean, it doesn't help, but like a lot of things don't help. So, but yeah, I know that when and it's also hard because it's like with dyslexia, if you're trying to organize and you're trying to do stuff and it starts to go up, is it the stress that is causing that, or is it that you're having a difficult time doing those things because of dyslexia, and therefore it's stressful, and then it's like it also cycles in? Because like when you're on the spot, you're gonna just stutter more. When you're on the spot, your dyslexia is going to go up. That's why when they say, "Okay, everybody, we're in a class, everybody read this page," I'm like, "Oh, I'm out. I'm not going to read that page. I'm going to fake this." So.
I always hated reading the restaurant, and this is in the old days of doing teaching, and nowadays it's all electronic, and the students now just have a card and they swipe it as they go in the class, and it just comes up on the computer screen, and you don't have to read anything out. But reading everything out, particularly if it's a new group, because I haven't learnt their names, and so I always want to have a set of pictures, their names, and then I want to learn their names prior to meeting them. So at least that way I can somehow remember them when I read that name out. I try not to get that name wrong. But it's annoying when there's a few, this awkward trend of some people do, where they put in extra letters in their name, with a K or something like this. Or, and they think it's trendy and cool. Actually, it's really annoying because you just can't pronounce the word. So you have to just go by a phonic way of pronouncing it.
Yeah, all that stuff comes into play. And sometimes on Facebook, it's been great because like it's a flashcard of the person and their name. But I have so many friends who are therapists, and they have a fake name. Now I haven't seen them in 10 years. I don't know what their name is other than Fancy Butterfly or whatever it is.
Amy King had a comment about dysnomia. She said as a child she had a brain injury, and she her workaround has been to describe the word she's looking for if she can't think of the exact word, and that works out. And I would add to that, my own father, who's a doctor, well, he was until he passed away, not doing much now. He had that issue throughout his life, and it was just sort of, it was very much just like part of who he was, and I never even thought of it. A lot of things I never even thought of it as, for what it was, until fairly recently. So it's interesting. I just and I even think I probably have it. I think I have it too. So to some extent, but there's also the Southern thing. Like there are a lot of speech characteristics that I never thought of until I moved from the South, and suddenly everyone was very interested in how I spoke and wanted to pick everything apart in a way that people don't do in the South. And I think there are some complex reasons for that, that have to do with class and a lot in race and a lot of stuff. But so yeah, I sort of just snowballing what Amy said here, but I appreciate her comment on brain injury and how dysnomia can be an aspect of that.
Dysnomia is when you lose words, correct?
When you can't find them is what I would say.
Yeah.
Or like, I was texting someone fairly recently, and I'll just give an example. I wanted to say, I was giving her my order for lunch one day, and I was thinking coleslaw, but I wanted to say it was a shrimp dinner, and I never had this before other than a few months ago, and I don't know if it's just something because of my medicine or whatever, but it's like I'll want to say shrimp, and I know I want to say shrimp, but it will come out coleslaw or something. Like it will come out like that. Doesn't happen a lot, but when I'm texting, even though I know I don't want to say that word. So is that like forgetfulness? But it's right there. I'm like, why did I just type coleslaw if I wanted her to know that it's part of the meal? So I think, I don't know.
And it could be so many things. And I think what I find with texting is the autocorrect will hijack my thoughts. Like today I posted a thing, Barbara Streisand posted on Twitter, if I can wear a face mask, then all of you can too, meaning it was like a big nose joke. And so I posted that, and I posted it, Babs has jokes, but it hijacked it and said Barb has jokes. I would never call her Barb. I would call her Babs. And I had to go back and I had to change it. So like all my tweets, all of my Facebook posts, I always have to go back and I have to change the grammar because it doesn't always say what I want it to say. And sometimes even I don't say what I want to say. So it's very complex and you just don't know what the cause is.
Okay.
Part of my dyslexia is reversing syllables. So, which I find, I don't see that happen very often, but I often have the right word, but I just put the second syllable first and the first syllable second. And sometimes it comes across, what the meaning of the word is, but other times it changes the concept of what I'm trying to say completely.
Like, when I talk to young people and they say, I think I might have dyslexia, I'm like, yeah, you might, because that is a classic way that we will do those reversals. And also, like, for me, it took me 25 years to say jewelry right, because I'd say jewelry. And there's just like little weird nuances in our language that sometimes come up like that. This is very interesting. And Jennifer, shall we wrap this up? I don't want to. There is a sweet spot in performing where it's like 5 more minutes, people are tired. So to make sure we avoid that.
Well, I'm just gonna put the that link to the article that I wrote in the chat right now, so you can go read it. It's not, yeah, I don't know. It's there now. And I wasn't sure how long if you wanted to do. You had mentioned a PowerPoint, so I know how much people love PowerPoints, so I didn't want. I didn't want anybody to miss out on such an opportunity. So, yeah, like, are you guys ready to sign off, or were there any other questions?
Your
The group
Twitter
that
thing.
never signs off. You guys have to be the ones that sign off.
I see.
Ernest and I are here. We'll be here till midnight.
Got it.
Well, Susan, do you have any announcements before we kind of officially end? And then maybe you could do announcements, and then I'll just hang out.
Yeah, I mean, why don't you officially end, and then I'll do some announcements.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I want to thank Susan and our interpreter wherever he went, and also Jennifer. Jennifer, it's always great to work with you. I hope we can go have a spa day in Ukiah when we don't. Yeah, if there's a way not to breathe on each other or give each other COVID.
We've got to do it. Totally.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you all for being here. I'm going to run to the bathroom. So I'll come hang out after.
I have a sense of humor. Everybody knows I don't have a sense of humor. I find you funny. I would say you're like one of the, and I don't know not sure what it is about you, but I actually get your humor. It makes sense to me. Most comics, I listen, I'm like, funny? I'm not sure why they think this is funny, because I don't know why it's funny, but I get every bit of it.
Well, it could be that we share a similar cultural experience. Might be that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yes, it was. I appreciate the time to have a more nuanced conversation is really nice. So
I enjoyed I enjoyed the questions too.
Yes.
Helped us understand more. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So in terms of our announcements, and you guys are certainly welcome to stay, and then who knows, we may continue talking on as we are inclined to do. So this is the second from the last week of our ADA celebration. Tomorrow is our last Saturday. That's going to be really pre-organized. We're having a quiz night. There'll be mostly ADA-oriented questions, and I don't know what they are, but there's supposed to be some prizes for those that answer the most questions correctly. And then we're also having Cassie Simmons, who is deaf, and will be doing her own comedy that will be signed. And I've watched her comedy without watching any of the interpreting or the auditory or anything, and just appreciated her motions, and it was wonderful. And then I also tried it listening to the voice interpreter, and it was funny too. It was a different kind of funny. So I really highly recommend you come, and maybe during the course of when she's doing it, change how you interact with her comedy, because you'll have a different experience when you're just watching what she does as a deaf person, and when you're actually listening to somebody who interprets what it is she's doing. So that's what's happening. And then Sunday we're taking a day off. It's going to be, I think, really the first official day off that we've done for the whole 9 weeks. And then it's the last week of ADA. And then we'll take 2 weeks off, and then we're going to start with I Love You Lead On, which will be different from ADA, and ADA has been primarily US oriented, and I Love You Lead On is going to be international. And we are looking for presenters. So Jennifer, if you're still on, if you're listening, we're looking for presenters for October 10th through December 30th right now, and then we'll be doing more after that. And all you have to do to be a presenter is to send me a brief bio and a description of you want to talk about. And as long as it's not too absurd and crazy, maybe even if it is, you get to present.